are your hosts for this fireside chats on winning in the Indian market, understanding the new Indian consumers. Picture this, a brilliant mind who managed to make customer obsession sound like a Bollywood blockbuster. Meet Mrs. Rama Bijapurkar. With over 4 decades of experience in consumer research and market strategy, she is a rare consultant who can read the Indian consumers like she's reading her morning newspaper and still finds new surprises every day. A visiting professor at IIM Ahmedabad, she teaches future leaders to see customers not as problems, but a popcorn chomping heroes of strategy. And yes, she served on boards of giants like Infosys, ICICI, Nestle, Sun Pharma, and Apollo Hospitals, sprinkling her customer centric magic across India. She's also the best selling author behind We Are Like That Only, A Never Before World, and Customer in the Boardroom. Books that make you realize Indian consumers are fascinating, and absolutely non negotiable in decision making. So here's Mrs. Rama Bijapurkar, the strategist who make businesses focus on people, not just profits.
Imagine someone who can make an MBA seem like a blockbuster movie. That's Mr. Sudhakar Rao. For over Mr. Sudhakar studied mechanical engineering, earned his PGDM from IIM Bangalore, and even did specialization in design thinking from IIT Solent. So yes, he solved more engineering problems than most of us done in our life. For over 2 decades, he wore multiple hats: brand strategist, startup mentor, social media advisor, and keynote speaker, driving brands across textile, food, and higher education. So here's Mr. Sudhakar Rao, the branding maestro who turns institution into inspiration.
So you can start the session. Voice carries.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Good afternoon, and I have the habit of looking up to anything that is excellent like you. You have to smile and cheer. Okay, let me confess. This is one of the best moments to sit next to Madam Rama Bijapurkar, and I don't know whether I will do the conversation or not, but take some good pictures here. I want this frame to be captured very well.
It's good for my brand equity. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. You have always been an inspiration to many like me. And in terms of the books that you have written, in terms of the decisions that you have made organization or helped the organizations make, in terms of the academic acumen that you bring to the table, and the way you have understood the Indian consumer, all is a book in itself, or it's a great learning all the time for us. Big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Ma'am, I have a set of few questions which is nothing great.
Which you didn't share with me so I could prepare.
To put more jargon, we try to complicate already a simple matter. So let's now do the reverse. The world out there is anyway talking in terms of jargon, making it complex, appearing that it is astronomical in terms of understanding an Indian consumer. So who is Indian consumer in your simple language, madam, for us to understand?
Okay, I'm going to rephrase Indian consumer with consumer India because there are, can we do something about the echo? Or is it the room that's echoing? Consumer India is everybody who wants to consume who lives in India. There is no cutoff to consumption. Often people tell me that people above a certain income level is a consumer. My question is, why? That's companies saying that if you don't earn enough for me, then I can't sell to you. So a consumer is anybody who My teacher, who I teach with, Professor A.K. Jain, he calls him a customer, and he says, customer वो है जो कष्ट से मरे. अगर कष्ट से नहीं मरे, जितना भी थोड़ा पैसा है, then he doesn't become a customer. So, and I'm calling it Consumer India because Indian consumers suggest one type, but we are a hydra-headed monster with so many of us. So let's say Consumer India.
Consumer India, yeah. There are normal expectations or classifications between aspirations and affordability. I mean, that's a given. Although you may advocate that, irrespective of those limitations, we need to define everyone as a consumer. But within the accepted norms of aspirations versus affordability, are there any lessons for us in this consumption paradox? Across, probably you can give us some use cases across different segments or different product lines to understand these nuances.
Okay, so it is the job of consumers to want certain things to solve their problems, to make their lives better, very simply put, to make their children feel better. And they have a limited amount of money. Now, how we give them what they want or need with the limited amount of money they have is our job as marketers. It is not their job. It is not coming out of a formula. It's not coming out of a marketing theory. So many years ago, my first ever work in competitor strategy analysis was with Hindustan Lever before most of you were born. And at that time, there was a company called Nirma. And the joke used to be that every time the chairman reviewed the sales graph of Nirma and the sales graph of others, the others line crossed Nirma, the sales graph of Surf and the sales graph of others. The others line crossed Surf one day. And he said, can I get a breakdown of these others? It turned out to be mostly a company called Nirma. So, of course, good multinationals go into denial about most things. And I happened to be around, so then I ended up as an insider-outsider joining the system to understand what this Nirma was all about. 3,500 tons of Surf, 35,000 tons of Nirma. Okay, very simply what Surf saw, and it is that simple, defined the consumer in a certain way as, if you don't have this much income and you don't have these kinds of clothes and this kind of running water, you don't qualify. Nirma saw a pile of people struggling with soap, laundry soap. And he said, hey, can I do better for them with a little bit of additional price? Consumers look at value, simply benefit minus cost, processed with the algorithm in their heads. And that's what he did. So it is how he actually saw a completely different space. And of course, if you want to sell cheap at a certain price performance point, as you call it, you have to be able to make it cheap. Your go-to-market has to be cheap. You have to learn to do those things. So simple example, at that time, I went to every CD CA's office all over Flora Fountain, trying to figure out what were the loopholes, what was the deal, where did the costing come from. We had a management trainee in A. Ferguson who we asked to help us, turned out to be Falguni Nair later. And she kind of told us that this is the equipment that I saw in the Nirma factory. And everybody on this side went into denial and said, you can't make detergent this way. Eventually, who learned was another big question. So like that, there are lots and lots and lots of examples of how, this whole innovation story is what? Can you get price, performance, and profit? Can you get your act together on that? Which is what I say in my latest book as well. The price the consumer wants to pay, the performance they want, we have monster consumers, and the profit that the company wants. Whether you look at margin alone or margin into volume, but to square this circle is the job that businesses have to do.
Any examples of the current customer? You have actually given examples of where you were around, but latest one.
So I'm completely bullish about the fact that the new economy, the digital economy, is actually fixing this price performance profit model. They have to stop burning VC money and doing stupid things. But as a conceptual model, what are they doing? They are aggregating small users, Otherwise, it's expensive. You need big users, big ticket sizes. They're aggregating small users. They're aggregating small suppliers. What does Oyo do? What do your cloud kitchens do? So you're aggregating to build scale here. You're aggregating to build scale here. You are using digital to crash costs on processes. And that's how, if you look at any of them, for example, let's take rural banking. You know, I used to hear so much crying, and I've served on the board of practically every Indian bank, Indian private sector bank. And there was a lot of crying about cost income ratio, which means that the cost of servicing an account and the income I make of all these small accounts in rural areas doesn't make sense. Reserve Bank kept saying, for every new urban account, I want you to create 3 new rural accounts in unbanked rural. So it's getting to be painful. What happens today? Today you have a banking correspondent who's a human being. You have the person going with biometrics that hit your Aadhaar, and therefore you know you are you. Aadhaar links the bank account, pings the bank account. He tells you exactly how much money you have. And he goes ahead, he's a human ATM, he's a human bank branch, he or she can service a much wider catchment area than a fixed building because he or she is mobile. And we've cracked the cost income ratio problem. Jan Dhan doesn't happen out of nowhere, right? So like this, there are loads and loads. And little before this era, there was this brilliant man who did solar ATMs. So a solar ATM was an ATM that worked without electricity, without this, without that. It needed air conditioning. That was the complicated innovation you needed, right? And he used to say that what is world class? World class definition of an ATM is how many notes it can count in a minute. But what a rural consumer needs, she says that I can't have 4 digits between me and my money, my son will take it. So they have to be able to look into my retina so I can close my eyes if I don't want to give money. So from there to the aggregation, the USP I call it, aggregate users, aggregate suppliers, crash processes, you have a model that works.
Amazing, amazing. I think that's a beautiful summarization of the new economy that we are dealing with now in terms of aggregating everything and collapsing the intermediary processes that we always encounter. We encounter red tape, in another world, that's the equivalent. But ma'am, I'm sure you have in your journey looked at the multiple facets of an Indian consumer. Let me say that you're traveling in this country, okay? You're traveling from Ahmedabad to Rajkot, you're traveling from Hyderabad to Warangal, you're traveling from Madurai to Chennai. Every 10 kilometers or every 15 kilometers, so to say, there are patterns that change in terms of our consumption, in terms of our cultural identity, in terms of what we believe will work for us, not just in terms of food, it's also in terms of cinema, in terms of newspaper that we read, in terms of other products that we use, and the way we communicate also. So these are all features in which the Indian consumer is known or discovered. In your journey, ma'am, now you methodically look at understanding the Indian consumer. What are some of the highlights that we generally don't know? I mean, what is not written in books? I'm not talking about your books, but in general, what is not written in business literature, but we need to know from somebody like you who is an authority on understanding Indian consumer.
Gosh, that's a hard question. So I will say 2 things. One, I will say to you that we are getting more fragmented over time rather than less fragmented. In 1991, we thought, we're going to become homogeneous. This great internet is going to unite us. We're all going to be one country. Just look at our politics. Our politics has gone completely fragmented. You can on OTT get your own particular dialect. Every religious cook with a little cult is also on the internet. So I think, and so there are many, many instances in which we're getting more and more fragmented. So I think that is a fact, and that is really what the modern world is doing to us. But I think the 2 things, I will tell you what business does not like and where I believe we have the conspiracy of silence as far as consumer India is concerned. One is income. I continue to say, and I have said in my new book, Lilliput Land as well, that we are not as rich as we would like to be. It's a joke that I quote, except it fell flat because of the word, which is a my generation word. But a man was asked someone, "How old are you?" on a TV interview, and he said, "In years or in yen?" And he said, "Don't be silly. How can you measure age in yen?" And it is, "I am 70, but I yen to be 20." At which my daughter said, "Is this a currency exchange joke?" And I said, "No, no, 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 no. Yen means desire," in the days when I was growing up. But I think that income levels, we are, while we chest thump about being the third or the fourth or the fifth largest economy, please look at per capita consumption of those who are one above and one below. 2 times, 3 times the size. We are 160, depending on the interest rate of conversion, we're 160 in the total ranking of per capita income. So we are a large economy made up of lots and lots of modest income people. It is surprising, every time in a board I hear numbers that say these are aspirers, these are achievers, these are destitutes, these are aspirants and so on. I'm like, where did you get the data from? Where do you get these numbers from? Right? Because I was just checking yesterday, the poverty line of America for a family of 4 is about 8,000 US dollars. Our top 10% per capita, that's per capita. Our top 10% per capita income, top 10%, richest 10% of households in India earn just a little bit more than that. So we can quit smoking dope, that's my first one. Second is that how we consume is a function of how we earn. And our occupation demographics are pathetic. If I were to ask you to guess how many people have a regular job with a regular pay like you do, I don't. The numbers are very small. It's less than 10 or 15% of India, right? Even in the uppermost income groups, it's not that much. So we are a nation with, we call ourselves gig workers, but you can take agricultural labor and make them swiggy boys, but our occupation demographics are not great. 4% formal, 96% informal, or the other way around, you know that. And our education. So I call it structure. So structure, as far as consumer India is concerned, is absolutely sad. Okay? Behavior is fantastic. Consumer India's behavior, consumption is the new god. We all love to consume. So that's a done deal. The supply side doesn't work so well. Right. But I think structure is what I would really like to talk about, because that's the secret we don't like.
It has actually thrown up several facts, and now I will gravitate towards one. The large amounts of data that we deal with in the marketing offices, even with government, I'm sure we are good at collecting data. We have lots of data, but what we do with the data, I don't know. I'm not really very sure how much of it is actually harnessed appropriately, what methodologies that we deploy, all those things aside. My question is, when we try to understand the customer, is it always data, or is it something else that we need to focus on? Where is the real consumer? Data, anecdote, and where is the insight?
Yeah, there's a debate going on called, is the plural of anecdotes data? You talk to my anthropology friends and they tell me the plural of anecdote is data. But it's not either or, obviously. If you have a lot of data, and so we hope AI will help us combined with good sense, but if you have a lot of data, it must lead to an insight. But there are many ways of getting data. So I ran a course at IIM Ahmedabad, which we designed 3 years ago, which had one module of neuroscience, one module of anthropology, and one module of big data. And we ran it with a common business problem. And the idea is that there are psychological foundations of behavior, social and cultural foundations of behavior, and there is the behavioral data that itself you get where you don't know what combinations. For example, one of the data sets we got was from a telecom company who showed us how every time you change the model on your phone, your behavior changed. It is fairly obvious, but sometimes, in fact, insight is obvious. It is, as I was reading somewhere, it is something you wish you had known, until you actually got to see it. And once you see it, you say, oh, okay, what's the big deal? I mean, that's an insight, right? So I think there are many ways. So when people say, oh, should I be doing market research? I'm like, I tell CEOs that, can you talk to your maid at home a little bit? Oh, that might be helpful. When you go into the road, open your eyes. That might be helpful. People are telling us all the time how much pain they have, but we don't want to see what we don't want to see. So my friend Kishore Biani of Future Retail, who's about the most insightful consumer observer I see, he says that it's also, not so much, one is you have to see what no one else sees. That's not so hard because it's all around. But it is thinking what nobody else thought about that which everybody sees. And I think sometimes that's really what is missing in our inside thing.
Hello. Yeah. So, ma'am, to build from here on, how do we make our classrooms or B schools or corporates or the country better at insight catching? For want of a better word, I'm saying catching. You may say data miners, and then what do you call people who get that insight? Can it be cultivated, or can we work around these things so that we are better at drawing the insights?
Absolutely, we can. And I will add our boardrooms as well. I once got thrown out of the boardroom of the chairman of, at a presentation with the chairman of Levers. I was very young then. And he said, Mrs. Bijapurkar, why are you telling me what is and why it is so? He said, I already know it. He said, if you can tell me, this was Sushil Datta, he just died. If you can tell me what can be and how to make it so, he said, I'm listening. So it is the filter that you apply to that same data. He also told me, go away for 2 months and come back, which was a fairly clear message that don't think you can get this done in 30 seconds and come back. But in our classes, we relentlessly ask why, so what, and why not, right? If you are, working on, let's say, you have to ask yourself, why is it that Nestle is so small after so many years of being in this country? Why is it not what you would expect it to be? Why is the bed sheets market not moving at the same snazzy, jazzy pace as the modular kitchen? Why are we going more parochial? Why, in spite of everything, is labor force participation low? And don't leave it to the economists, it's about people. And people are telling you all the time, husband के boss आ रहा है, chicken curry घर में बनाना है तो मेरे को leave लेना पड़ता है. Now you see it as a 23% absenteeism and you say, oh, let's fix the absenteeism problem. So I think the people view, if you look at the people view of why phenomena happen, and don't just look at a macro view, but if you look at it through many filters, including the lens of people, which is my consumption work. Consumption is about household choices. It's not the C of the C plus I plus G is equal to GDP, the formula, right? So therefore, then it's fairly obvious to know that just because your income has increased to the level that America was 50 years ago, will your consumption patterns be the same they want, right? So I think it's relentlessly asking, our classes hate us. So sometimes we go to them and say, let us tell you what you already know. Don't regurgitate it back to us. Let's build from there and say, so what? So what and why not? I think is a very powerful thing. And even in boardrooms, we get so much of data. Like a few days ago, we saw some absolutely stellar performance from a company. And someone there said, but I don't understand, what's the magic that makes you so fabulous? Now, I know you're fabulous, your numbers are saying it, but what's the magic that makes you fabulous so that I know what risks you might have? That's what I think insight requires.
People have asked me this question actually. Now I'm not going to turn it into a promotion of my own organization. I will keep it for some other day. But that's a good question to be asked. What is so fabulous about you? Why is it working for you? I think someone should actually keep their eyes and ears open and then keep listening to those things. And nothing is permanent, madam. And I think it can actually go wrong also with a small cultural misalignment somewhere in our operations. And then things can go wrong. Well, now I move from here to another aspect which you slightly hinted. That is it okay to say that the marketers in other countries like US or marketers in other countries like UK or in some of the European countries or say Australia are quite relaxed compared to the marketers in India? It is a big challenge and mind-boggling to actually map the customer and customize our communication and outreach programs if you are marketing within India, whereas our counterparts, our brethren and sisters there are actually relaxing and having parties right from Thursday onwards.
I don't know enough about whether they're having parties or not. Maybe in Lulu's session you can tell us whether they party from Thursday onwards. But you're right on the count that not only do we have a hydra-headed monster called Consumer India, which is, I mean, I've often been asked by multinationals that come into the country, why do you need a Rolls-Royce approach to segmentation for a market so small? And I keep saying that India demands more strategic complexity than its current market worth. But the even bigger problem is that we have what I call monster consumers. From 1991 onwards, and I was just looking at data on tariffs recently, the prices of everything have come down and the quality of everything's gone up. So we raised one whole generation who have grown up to be our consumers, who know that talk time was 16 rupees a minute, it came down to virtually free. Air conditioners were 70,000 rupees, they came down to 30,000. And the cost of everything, and that's because we rolled back tariffs and we also increased competition. So even now, given, never mind how many airlines we have left, but even so, today when you look at the cost of airfare compared to the days when I had to fly my mother down when my child was growing up, I mean, it's a breeze, right? So that's first gen. Then what happened was that we had the Chinese goods invasion. They were fabulous, we know it, we love them. Even if they didn't work all the time, the price that you paid for it, it was fine. Even my mother's puja room had little electric gizmos in the form of diyas. And slowly over time, China started making for India. And all my maids now have very nice saris, and deep in rural Tamil Nadu, the little girls have very nice princess dresses, all made in China, all quite cheap. So our consumer got used to that. Then came Amazon. In fact, I had a piece called My Beloved Amma Jaan, but that's another joke in WhatsApp. But Amazon taught us for the first time that you can return things, no problem. And because they have aggregated every single small user, going back to the user thing, you can get anything you want, including 8 varieties of cow dung. You can get it quite cheap, and you can return it if you don't like it. Now just look at this. After this came the new economy revolution where people are burning VC money and giving it to you cheaper and cheaper. Think of many generations of consumers who've been raised on this. They are monsters. They're now saying, plus everywhere else in the world, high touch went out and high tech came in. For us, high touch and high tech are the same. So when banks, we struggle. Recognize me on the phone, let me walk into your bank branch, recognize me on the internet. Why should I go to the net banking? Do it for me on my app. So all the time, we have just got monster consumers. So you're right that dealing with the price performance profit problem is much, much more challenging because the profit problem is a complicated business model. Costs of complexity have to be handled. As a company, you need to know how to do that. If you're doing 23 versions of a bike for 23 parts of the country, what do you optimize, what do you not? How do you differentiate, but how do you not? And how do you keep your percentage of complexity to your net sales the lowest possible, right? So, yes, we have a hard time, and that's why India is not a favorite. Most multinationals have retired hurt. Among other things, their business economics is not geared for a lot of people consuming a little bit each. That adds up to a lot. Whereas if you look at the gold, those gold apps and all, now you can buy 1 rupee of gold, 5 rupees of gold. They will store it for you. There is no penalty for being remote and small, and you will get it when you want it, and it's regulated by Big Brother RBI as well. So yes, we have a harder time, but that's why we are exporting ideas to the world, I hope.
We are what we are.
Like that only.
We are like that only. That's the title of ma'am's book.
Which I often tell multinationals is Indian English for it is what it is, just deal with it. Because my international edition was called Winning in the Indian Market. And I often say that that is a Western paradigm of conquest, whereas this is an Indian paradigm of surrender.
Absolutely. Thank you, ma'am. A lot of insights from what you've explained in the previous response. Amazing. I'll move to the next question before I open the mic for audience to ask you questions directly. Be ready, jot down your questions and be ready. I'll just take this one question. Ma'am, this is, we are moving away. Of course, in the initial questions, we talked about classifying people from SECA to SECB. We have moved away quite long to understand the Indian consumer. Since you belong to Hyderabad, I'm asking this question, and this question is, in the last, say, 50, 60 years or in the past, or when I was a kid, I used to know and hear of some brands like Ampro biscuits, Charminar cigarettes,
Zinda Tilasma.
Zinda Tilismar. It is still there, Zinda. And some of the brands which I am naming are now not there. Then brands like Alwyn, brands like HMT watches, these are not there now. When this city which you belong to is growing like this, a large part of it is growth in technology, a large part of it is growth in enterprise in terms of pharma, in terms of GCC capabilities, so on and so forth. Why are not consumer brands, the consumer-facing brands are not being built in Hyderabad? What is your understanding of why it's not happening? Because in any city, if you have consumer-facing brands, the cultural identity, you'll become part of their emotion, and then it lives much longer. So Bangalore has got a few brands, other cities have got a few brands. If I say that Royal Enfield belongs to Chennai, then yes, that's their brand. What do we have in Hyderabad, and why we don't have so many of those consumer-facing brands?
Sudhakar, I will say that the crisis of the brand is all over India. I think we built much better brands pre-1991, and there's a long story for why. Now we are, the product is pretty much the hero. I do believe that if you believe that brands belong to the canvas of life and not just the quadrangle of the marketplace, I don't believe that we have got brands that are markers, or hardly any, that are markers of our times, of the tumultuous period we've gone through in every which way, economically, politically, socially, every which way. The question of why are we having the crisis of the brand, and everything that people call as a brand is actually a trademark with recognition, or a logo with recognition. So I often tell my banker friends that if you replaced the apps of or the bank statements of each of you guys, none of us would know the difference. It is true of consumer companies, it's true of market research companies, it's true of a lot of things. But I think and also because you are getting a lot more exciting products from the Lilliput stable that are coming on, and many of them actually are much more exciting. So I wouldn't really damn Hyderabad. I don't even believe Bangalore and Chennai have it. Historically, they may have it. But brands which are in the canvas of life of that city, I think we're a long way off. But I think Hyderabad as a brand has found itself, hasn't it?
As a city.
Yeah, Hyderabad as a brand has found itself. You heard it in the morning session as well, right? And from the days when this was the Boondocks, every time my friends from Gurgaon come here, their mind is blown. And everybody's big data centers are here. Recently there was an article about how all the cool people in the world are from Hyderabad Public School, the cool achievers. And, it's on a roll now. So I think Hyderabad as a brand has found itself, but not even maybe 1.5 Hyderabad biryani brands.
Yeah,
Maybe 1.5. We should have more.
We should have more. But the idea is to have brands beyond biryani, beyond pearls, beyond what we are actually originally known for, in terms of building other consumer spaces that we have wide open. If you're saying it is a national problem, then I'll
Yeah,
little.
we have the crisis of the brand. We should hopefully, when competition increases, we might have. Everyone knows the words differentiation, but I think the hard work that's actually needed to do that, and that a brand is not some voodoo magic. It is the talk of a walk you have to have. If you don't have a walk, you can talk as much as you like, but it's like the guy in office, right? He talks very well, but beyond a point, hopefully, when we do CEO searches at boards, we say, can he or she deliver shareholder value, or are we going to get a nice chairman speech,
Right.
MD speech?
Good. The lesson to the anchors here is, apart from speaking so well, you should also write your term paper equally well. That's Madam's insight to all of you. But you are speaking very well. That's a big round of applause to all
I
of
was
you.
envying you that you get a nicely written term paper as compared to the kind of crap we get.
Correct. Oh, the Indian student has grown, ma'am, and blessed are the teachers who are teaching currently.
I don't know about you, but all my students come ChatGPT prepared. And so I have to tell them that I read ChatGPT last night, this is what it said, now can we go so what beyond that? But it's really hard.
It's really hard. That was my next question. The consumer today is having everything served in the in the living room. Everything comes home. The ability to understand this customer also becomes challenging, and the demands are growing. Therefore, to match the growing demands is also pretty challenging. Well, we will now shift the mic to the audience. Do you have any questions? Please keep raising the hands. Let me see that there are a bunch of hands up there. Then only I'll open the mic. Okay, very good. We will first give it to you only.
Thank you, sir. Thank.
Can you just wave to me so I know who's asking the question?
I'm asking. I'm Pradeep Kumar here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your consumer is here, ma'am.
Yeah.
I know. My insight, I'm backbenching, sorry.
It's as difficult as India.
Yes. Ma'am, I'm hearing you after 30 years or something like that. You used to come to Hyderabad, the Advertising Club of Hyderabad, and you spoke.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, long back, 90s,
Yes,
the 80s.
I remember
yeah.
that.
Nice. You haven't changed much. You still look as good as that.
Oh.
Thank you so much.
Question.
Aged.
My question is, we Indians readily accept foreign brands, American, European brands. But how to make the Americans or the Europeans accept Indian brands?
Okay, I suppose there is no excuse from getting away from the fact that they have to be relevant and they have to add value to them. So my friend who ran Tasty Bite used to assure me that the Americans ate his palak paneer. I don't think we did so well with Indian wine in the UK. I think we tried, it didn't happen. But I'll tell you, America has accepted Indian brands from Ajay Banga to Satya Nadella. So we've just got to look at brands. The Made in India tag, where it carries quality, works. Infosys as a brand, TCS, Indian IT, works. If we're trying to do basmati rice, you have to do better, I guess. So I don't think there is any rejection. I think the difference now, and I have a metric, and that metric is how many places abroad can I go and work and wear my sari and not get anybody take a second look. And I'm very comfortable now compared to when I started. So I don't think there is any rejection of Made in India, as compared to the early days where Arvind Mills used to tell me that when they went with samples of denim, people would say this can't be made in India. I think that's not happening. But the brand mindset, I think you'll see IT, pharma, and apparel in India have the same thing. They want to go up the value chain, but don't want to invest in what it takes to build a brand. So I think the fault is ours, not theirs.
Okay. Thank you, madam.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ma'am, yes. Volunteers, move fast.
You have the mic, go ahead.
Hi there. Oh, is it me?
Oh, sorry.
No, first you.
So my question is about sustainability. Adi Godrej was talking about his 8 rupee packets of dye that Indian consumers buy in your villages, in your rural areas. And it speaks to what you were saying about how consumer India buys smaller, but the volume is greater. So what I wanted to understand is, given the way the world is today, how are corporates and Indian consumers, or consumer India, how are they thinking about sustainability? Is that even a conversation that's happening?
That is a conversation, it's not a priority conversation. I'm going to get shot dead for saying it, I think. My sense is it's not a priority conversation. I also think that when you expect consumers to pay more for the stuff that you are shoving down their throats, having done badly before that, I mean, look at the packaging that comes from Amazon. Okay, it really offends me that some of these brands talk about sustainability without actually telling their suppliers how to send us the stuff. So I think to begin with, we all have plastic packets we recycle. When I get bubble wrap from Amazon, I cut it into little squares and I transport my jewelry in it when I travel. Okay? I wish we would get a detergent that doesn't take so much water. But to ask us to pay more for what we were already very good at doing doesn't seem to be fair. And I think you're right. Every time we have a fatwa and we ban something, we seem to be okay, right? You will not find a shred of plastic in the Nilgiris, not even plastic bottle. In Bombay City, we don't do so well. So, yeah, I think there's a lot more. Even when we look at ESG at boards, I think the E, which gives you credits, is a very important place, and sustainability from that angle, but more in a macro sense, not in consumer products as yet.
Yeah, the conversation is on. Yeah, you want to ask question, but wait. We'll take him. You are a UG student from IIM Bangalore. Am I right?
Sir. Yes, sir. Kudos to your memory. So, hi Sudhaka sir, hi Rama ma'am. Basically, I've asked ChatGPT to frame my question better, so I'll read it out. Ma'am, in recent years, we've seen a surge of startups in India that aren't necessarily building new products, but are instead solving critical inefficiencies in existing systems, especially within the supply chain and logistics space. These companies often create employment opportunities at scale and deliver jobs or gig work. And in doing so, they are not just solving a problem, but are also shaping a new kind of middle-class consumer behavior. So basically, what I wanted to ask is, we are basically creating Swiggy and Zomato delivery boys, right? And these people at large will become the consumers in the future, right, after getting a job. So why don't we have product-first companies that would actually prime the behavior of the audience to, thrive for a little more? Right. Becoming a Swiggy or a Zomato delivery boy or sort of any Amazon delivery boy is easy. A lot of my friends in college were doing that, but unfortunately a lot of unemployed adult males are also doing that, right? You talked about Nirma being sasta for Indian audience. That is good. But after a while, if we are still trying to sell sasta products to the customers and customers are actually happy in buying sasta products, are we creating, lazy sort of customers by actually supporting these startups? I mean, not supporting. Obviously, it's good for the startups, but I feel like the consumer, the employee of the startup and who is the future consumer is becoming a little lazy. Why are we not talking about, we are talking about Perplexity AI CEO being Indian, but we are not having any that sort of companies here, right? So nobody talks about those things. Like many people talk about the intelligent ways of solving a supply chain issue. Yeah, that might be an existing issue in India because we have a large population, diverse, people living in various states, connecting them together, making them these, what is this called? You call monsters, right? What was the monster? Consumer monsters, right? Scrolling Instas, buying anything sasta. Are they being precarious? Like, are they being lazy? Are these startups making the audience really, and not the audience, the Indian consumer lazy, and not aspiring to become someone like Steve Jobs or someone, I don't, like Steve Jobs is a huge word, but I'm sorry for the informality. I hope you get my
No,
question.
it's not the informality, it's the unclarity I'm grappling with.
Okay.
But let me try very quickly to answer a few things. One, there's a disclaimer under ChatGPT that says ChatGPT is not always right. I want to draw your attention to that. The second thing I want to say is that please look at a youth study called Drivers of Destiny that we've done. You'll find it on my website, which makes the point that because we have not provided enough jobs to young people and because they have grown up with expending a lot of agency in the face of bad structure, their dreams are bonsai'd. So I think we have a bonsai dream problem. I think that is a fact. And finally, I will say that there is no caste system when it comes to consumption. The dharma of business is to add value to consumers and extract value from them. If a consumer is getting value added at a price performance point X, the consumer will buy, otherwise no. So your job is to continuously create value as the consumer perceives it. If you start trying to impose your systems on consumers, then you shouldn't be in business.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Next time, what you should do is, if you have a very long and dilemma-oriented question like this, read it into a chat GPT and ask it to simplify. And summarize it, and then come here. You try it next time in the class. Okay? Good. Over to you, sir.
Sir, ma'am, thank you for sharing wonderful insights on Consumer India and to Sudhakar sir for moderating the session. My question is on the lines of Monster Consumer, especially with regards to the low income groups. We see they are not shy to spend beyond their income levels because they have a lot of accessibility to consume things with the help of credit cards or loans. And availability of products in fragments or through consumer loans. This is kind of making the consumer from low income group fall, or from the lending institutions being having defaulters. So do you see any kind of change in the consumer behaviors, or any kind of regulations by the lending institutions to control this kind of consumption coming from the low-income groups? Thank you, ma'am.
So I think responsible credit is pretty much the job of the credit giving agencies. We saw the whole microfinance fiasco in Andhra Pradesh, where we shoved more money down the throats of people and then got them for not repaying till the courts intervened. The microfinance industry went bust. A lot of your and my money that was in banks that was lent to them, we took a haircut. So I think responsible lending and personal loan rising is something the Reserve Bank of India monitors all the time. While often bankers feel that the regulator should not get into that much detail, I mean, if we need that to correct irresponsible lending, we should have irresponsible lending. As far as consumers are concerned, there are those that will do that irresponsible credit taking, and there are those that are prudent and won't. If someone is insisting on giving you free money, what's not to like? But models like Bajaj Finance and so on are giving it to you with zero interest because the manufacturer is paying for access to the consumer base, which is a much nicer model. But personal loan increases and suicides thereafter is quite common. And I think it is a problem that the regulator and companies, I mean, to me, that's a bigger problem than sustainability. I'm saying, can we have responsibility? Not corporate social responsibility, but responsible corporate behavior. That's what I would say.
Amazing. We ran out of time, but with permission, can we take that boy? Yeah.
It's your permission we need to take questions, not mine.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Arnav Jain. Ma'am, my question is regarding UPI. Like recently, it's been in the news again because government is maybe planning to keep a charge on it. So what came to the dilemma that came in my mind is, earlier I had read a research report that UPI had made it so convenient to pay that it has increased the consumer spending and people are now spending more, so it might boost the economy. But also banks are telling that because you have kept it charge free, no merchant rate and all, it is putting a stress on us. So like you have said, we need price, performance and profit. So the banks are telling that it's hurting our profit, but there are research that the performance of the product is so good that it might boost the economy. So ma'am, what is your opinion? Should it stay free or should a charge be added now?
Before we answer the question, you can go on by 5 minutes as there's a slight delay. The session is engaging, please go on. You can go on by 5 minutes.
Okay, so yeah, I have seen UPI through the lens of a board member at NPCI, and the lady who's coming for the next session was the chief operating officer for us at NPCI, so you should definitely ask this question. So I think in India, free is compulsory. If it's free, it will do very well. That's a fact. I think what banks and all are being told is that if you have all these merchants, then you have a community of merchants that are tied to you, then please find a way to monetize them. Don't pay, ask the consumer. So there's a model called Square in the US that you can look at. We used to teach a case called It's Hip to be Square. And Square basically offers them other facilities so that you can make your money from the catchment area of consumer of merchants that you have. So there are many ways to monetize. It is true that the minute you put a charge on it, depending on the charge, people will sit down and say, is the benefit I'm getting from it the cost of not doing UPI but doing cash? Is that worth the incremental charge? And some volumes may drop off, right? Does it help the economy? I think the logic is not you don't spend more merely because, but if there is repressed spending, change nahi hai, to main nahi kharidti hu. Today I say scan kar lung kya, theek hai, I want that sandwich at the airport. So to that extent it does help you. So yeah, that's life, right? It's working very well because it's free. If you put a charge on it, some people will say it's still worth it. I've got habituated to it. Some people will say, typically my guess is the Indian consumer will say, for these things that are inevitable, I will use UPI, that sandwich at the airport that I desperately need. For the other one, I will think about cash. It's not yet happened.
The lady in the front row, please.
Well, if my stock price continues to grow, if I make a lot of money from stock options, if I can, with every unit of distribution expansion, continue to expand my top line, I don't have to go the hard path. And it is hard work to expand distribution. So what are D2C brands doing today? They're saying we will go phygital. What does that mean? It means that the more I distribute, the more I will, because of geographic expansion, my revenue will increase. And also, I think there is, for a long time we neglected product as a basis for competition. So there is some amount of product differentiation, not very much, but I think distribution and efficiencies. If you look at India Inc., when the top line doesn't grow for 8 quarters, the bottom line will grow. Because companies have learned to extract value out of efficiencies in the system. So I think right now they don't have to do it. When they have to do it, they will.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other? You. Please raise your hands, let me know.
Sorry, and when they don't differentiate, then they buy. So you will spend 2,000 crores and buy a brand of detergent that you could have made yourself.
Good. I think someday we should also talk about the consumption of war equipment that's happening around the world. Not today.
Yes, the saving of Europe.
Where are the people who are raising hands? Please, let me see that. Yeah. That's a good one. Good one. Okay. You also want to? We'll start from there. Can you please pass the mic this side, on the left side of the country? Yeah.
So backbenchers everywhere don't ask questions.
See, I am getting a bad name here. Backbenchers are not asking any questions. Oh yeah, see? Very good. Stay there. We'll come to you. Go ahead.
Is related to your pet peeve, how to bring in a setting of a D2C homegrown brand, how to bring the nuances of the consumer into the boardroom. I mean, there is no boardroom existent, but what I meant is, how do I understand the consumer when there are limitations of resources? What is one cardinal task?
Hit the streets yourself, talk to everybody you know, observe, keep your antennae out and do it yourself.
And it's the sampling bias that comes with it, because I'm
Sorry?
struggling with it. The sampling bias that comes with it. So when I talk to people, it would be mostly my peers.
So you can take care of your own sampling bias. Don't just talk to your peers. Talk to people, take a bus. Kishore Bayani used to say he never traveled business class because he was terrified. So take buses, walk the streets, go to shops, go to markets. Talk to
Primary
your
market
maids. Talk to your maids' children who are the Gen Next. Talk to the guy who walks your dog, the peanut seller, his daughter.
Thank you, ma'am.
A lot of times when you go to a new city and if you want to test whether your brand is known by a large number of people, you talk to your auto driver.
Yes,
You-
absolutely.
That's valid, right, ma'am?
Absolutely.
Good.
Cab
Lesson-
drivers,
one lesson
auto
right now.
drivers. Yeah, completely.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Sai Harshal. Before asking the question, I will give the glimpse on the niche I'm working on. I'm an aspiring student entrepreneur and working on to elevate, enlighten, and empower the artisan society of our nation. And initially, I'm focusing on tier one of my approach to provide the income, dignity, and purpose to every household woman who got hidden in the dark side, but she is having a good craftsmanship. So my question is, ma'am, I want to make this Bindu as a premium brand. So as you said, we can't segregate the consumer on the how much amount they earn. But when it comes to my segment, does focusing on premium high-end consumers make strategic sense in the Indian market context for such a brand like this Bindu? Because the high-end customers think that the need to have for them, and the low-end customers think that Bindu is a nice to have. So I need to hit my need to have customers, right? So I'm thinking to segment the audience on the amount they generate annually. So do you think it works?
Yeah, of course. I think where to play is a strategic choice you make. Where to play is an entirely your choice. If you target where to play comes with the size of a market, it comes with a certain level of pain and gain, the choice is yours.
Ma'am, but I got a feedback from a professor and he said like, it works something like charity, it doesn't work like a business. Do I
And
need
if
to
you're making
change?
unit margin positive, it's fine. Is it sustainable? Is it a positive unit margin? Can you grow it? If the answer is yes, then forget about theory.
Forget about theories, focus on unit economics. Okay, thank you. Is that, yeah. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen who are continuing to raise their hands. Should we give one? Okay.
I think the next session.
The next session is happening, so
Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Mohan. I am the founder of a company called Case Veda. My question is, as a knowledge consumer, I am more concerned about the quality of the content than whether the content is written by a human or generated by AI. In such a scenario, why do companies continue to emphasize on human-generated content when a human, with the help of AI, can create quality content?
Yeah, I don't think companies have any religion. I think they're willing to do what it takes to cut costs. Sometimes, so a lot of companies I know are doing, in fact, what is worse is they're doing chatbots pretending to be human and not telling us they're chatbots. I think that's the worst one. But yeah, I think companies will do whatever gives them the best bang for the buck. Have no doubt about that.
that's an amazing conversation, ma'am. Thank you so much for helping us with these insights. Your consumer today is a musician, an adventurist, a media person, a student in tech, a student in business management, and an author, and a sustainability expert. These are your consumers today. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Now I request Mr. Sudhakar Rao to felicitate our esteemed speaker, Mrs. Rama Birjapurkar. Well, sir, we also have a little something for you.
This is much bigger, ma'am.
I know, I'm just thinking you got the bigger bag. I mean, what is this?